Hey everybody, this is going to serve as a walkthrough of sorts of the article The Primacy of Perception by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. So in our typical face-to-face class, I would usually spend a whole day of our class where we as a group would walk through the different parts of this article and unpack what Merleau-Ponty is doing with his philosophy. However, because circumstances are what they are, I'm going to be trying to do that with you via the magic of internet video. So what does that mean for us? Well, first and foremost, it means that I need you to play along at home. So if you have the means to do so when you're watching this video, I want you to have up your PDF of the Primacy of Perception, which is available on D2L on our course page under Merleau-Ponty, okay? The other thing is hopefully you've already read it and you've watched the intro video that I did about this particular article. So if you have both of those things done, awesome. If you haven't watched them, go back and watch them and then come back and watch this video. I'm going to try and be brief and to the point with the main things that Merleau-Ponty is doing in this article. And and hopefully we'll get through it and you will understand Merleau-Ponty better. This is a really, in my honest opinion, this is a really fun article with a lot of insight into the type of philosophy that Merleau-Ponty does and why he is such an important figure still in in Western philosophy. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into it. So this article is broken up into two parts. The first part is called the preliminary summary, and really here Merleau-Ponty is summarizing a lot of his major work that he's done, and he highlights a few key things that he thinks are really crucial in his work. So the first thing is that he begins by stating that perception is an originary mode of consciousness. It's not the case that categories are primary and perception is derivative of categories. Rather, it's the case that perception is central to any process of knowing and that it is more than just taking a look at something. And here in this early section, Merleau-Ponty gives us a phrase that will continue to be really important for him. And he says this: matter is pregnant with its form. Matter is pregnant with its form. He doesn't fully explain it here, and I'm going to go into it later, so I'll leave it hanging. But matter is not just innate stuff. And there isn't just like forms of how the universe functions in our heads. Instead, matter, everything that is around us, is pregnant with its form. There are a lot of implications that arise from this claim. But Merleau-Ponty moves on from it, and he says that the certainty of ideas is not the foundation of the certainty of perception. Hello, Descartes. But is rather based on it. All consciousness is perceptual, even consciousness of ourselves. In other words, knowing ourselves is not a matter of just sort of immediately knowing, oh, I feel this way, but we are perceiving ourselves, perceiving our interior life, which if you stop and think about it, sounds pretty true. If you've ever had an experience where you said something and then you said, why did I say that? Or I think a much more common example would be to be really tired early in the morning. You just woke up, you're groggy, right? Not everything is ready to go, and you bump into something or you forget why you were holding your toothbrush or something like that, or you put the milk in the microwave instead of back in the refrigerator, that sort of a thing. With all of these, You are observing yourself acting in a way that is different than what is necessarily immediate to you. In other words, your very self is not immediate to you. There is some distance between your observation of yourself and what yourself is doing. But we'll keep going with this because that's another idea that has a lot of influence on the history of philosophy going forward. Merleau-Ponty also claims that the perceived world is the always presupposed foundation of all rationality, all value, and all existence. The perceived world is always presupposed as the foundation of rationality. Not a mathematical Tron-like landscape without any materiality to it or physicality to it. No, the perceived world is what gives rise to rationality, or at least is its foundation. So, the second part of this article is called Report of the Session. And here is where Merleau-Ponty moves into fleshing out his argument. To do so, he begins with the activity of perceiving itself, asking a question not unlike the following. What are we doing when we are perceiving? When I'm perceiving something, what's going on there, right? Yeah, I have a lot of assumptions that, oh, I'm just seeing something, or I'm hearing it, or maybe both at the same time, or I am observing something, and because I have a set of judgments about it, I know what's going on. But Merleau-Ponty wants us to slow down and think about what is going on when we are perceiving. Now, his starting point is somewhere odd. His starting point is something that's called apperception. That is, the unperceived but necessary parts of any perceived object. The example of perceiving a book might be good, right? Like, I have my copy of The Phenomenology of Perception right here, and you can see the cover of it, but you cannot see the backside of it. In like manner, I can't see the cover of it except in the little monitor reflection I have in front of me, but that's an artificial representation of it, right? I am not being presented with this part in the front, but I know that it's there even if I don't see it, right? We don't see all of an object, we see parts of it. But our epistemological systems focus on statements of such generality that they fail to account for the manner in which perception actually happens. And Merleau-Ponty goes into this with a bit more depth, saying, should I say, and this is from the article, so this is on page 14 if you're following along at home, should I say that the unseen sides are somehow anticipated by me as perceptions, which would be produced necessarily if I moved, given the structure of the object? If, for example, I look at a cube, knowing that the structure of the cube as it is defined in geometry, I can anticipate the perceptions which this cube will give me while I move around it. Under this hypothesis, I would know the unseen side as a necessary consequence of a certain law of the development of my perception. But if I turn to my perception itself, I cannot interpret it in this way because this analysis can be formulated as follows. It is true that the lamp has a back, that the cube has another side, but the formula, it is true, does not correspond to what is given to me in perception. Perception does not give me truths like geometry, but presences. I grasp the unseen side as present. I do not affirm that the back of the lamp exists in the same sense that I say the solution of a problem exists. The hidden side is present in its own way. It is in my vicinity. In other words, it is present as absent. And the key here is to recognize that perception does not give us the object in its entirety. It doesn't give us truths like geometry, but presences. It is perspectival. We see the world, we perceive the world from a perspective, and we have a certain presence of a side or a perspective, and presence of that which is also part of the whole, but not fully given to us at that moment, immediately to us. It's given as absent. The classical account of perception then misses the phenomena altogether in its attempt to grasp it fully. Perception is not, Merleau-Ponty argues, the observation of separate objects seen as abstract wholes. It is the perception of a field of relations and potential meanings. So if perception is not a kind of judgment, and if it is also not grasping objects in their entirety, what is perception? Well, on page 15, Merleau-Ponty makes this clear. He says, "We observe at once that it is impossible, as has often been said, to decompose a perception, to make it into a collection of sensations, because it is the whole, because in it the whole is prior to the parts, and this whole is not an ideal whole. The meaning which I ultimately discover is not of the conceptual order. If it were a concept, the question would be how I can recognize it in the sense data. And it would be necessary for me to interpose between the concept and the sense data certain intermediaries, and then other intermediaries between these intermediaries, and so on. It is necessary that meaning and signs, the form and matter of perception, be related from the beginning, and that, as we say, the matter of perception be pregnant with its form." Again, matter pregnant with its form. Now, the big takeaway here is that meaning and signs are related from the beginning with regard to perception. I don't just see a thing in its abstract status. I see it as meaningful or less meaningful for me. When we talked about Heidegger, we talked about how objects are useful or not useful for me, right? My water bottle here is useful as a container for liquid, but it could also be useful as a hammer. But depending on the job, it might not be the right tool for the job and thus end up being a really bad hammer. But its meaning is based on its use for me in the projects that I'm engaged in. For Merleau-Ponty, it's a little bit different. It's that the world around us is full of meaning and full of signs, and that these interact and shape our perception of the world. We don't get a clear, neutral perception of the world. We don't get a view from the 0 point. Instead, our view begins from our own 0 point, which is our 0 point of orientation, or our body. Our body is our own 0 point, not some objective, abstract space beyond ourselves. And we perceive the world, we engage with presences and things of that nature through that 0 point of orientation. So, we're running a little bit short on time here, so I'm going to jump very quickly to page 16, where you can see Merleau-Ponty's big contribution. All right? So if you jump with me to page 16, Merleau-Ponty makes his big contribution. The perceptual synthesis, which brings together all of the presences of perception into meaningful wholes that are themselves related in a field, must be accomplished by a subject capable of ascertaining the various perspectives given in perception. In other words, here's the big one. In other words, the subject must have a body, must be a body, and that body subject then is the being that is capable of observing from different perspectives the infinity of presences available in the perception of any given object. Stay tuned for part 2.